After opening in 1952, Efteling remained a family park focused around the fairy tale forest. As the decades passed of operating this way, park attendance began to decline, and the Efteling's future looked uncertain until a new roller coaster would open, inspired by one in America that would take the small park into the future and propel it to become bigger than it ever could have dreamed. After the success of the fairy tale forest, Efteling began to look to expand, and were trying to find ways to bring in more and more guests. From as early as the end of the 60s, the idea of a roller coaster had been discussed by the park, but they remained focused on child-friendly fun. Attendance began to drop at Efteling, and the small fairy tale theme park began to struggle, with its future uncertain. To combat this, many plans were discussed over the next half-decade, each incorporating a different kind of roller coaster. During the mid-70s, those developing the upcoming plans would take trips to the United States to see what was popular at US amusement parks. The hope was that they would find inspiration to bring in a new audience to the mostly fairy tale themed park. It was from these visits that the park would try to bring in teens, thrill seekers, and families together, changing the path of Efteling forever. Surprisingly, they would find what they need in Europe. Just not the real Europe. The Loch Ness Monster at Busch Gardens Williamsburg in Virginia. A huge roller coaster unlike anything seen in Europe. The real Europe, not the fake Europe that was built at Busch Gardens, the old country.
The Loch Ness Monster lives. Terrible in its power to drive men mad with fear. See for yourself when the Loch Ness Monster surfaces. At the old country Busch Gardens, Williamsburg.
The Arrow development coaster, the Loch Ness Monster, opened in 1978 as the world's first coaster with interlocking loops, along with being the tallest and fastest roller coaster ever made. It was an instant success.
It's custom designed, taking maximum advantage of the park's terrain. And it's constructed of standard, low-maintenance aero ride elements of proven reliability.
It wouldn't be an Arrow roller coaster exactly that the Efteling would get though. At the time, Arrow was owned by the Rio Grande Railroad, which had sold the manufacturing rights and designs to multiple companies overseas. Steel company Vekoma would pay Arrow to use their designs and patents, and even layouts to create their own roller coasters. Efteling hoped to bring that success of larger roller coasters to their own park. And to do this, in 1980, they would visit Vekoma and ask for something that could match and compete with the Loch Ness Monster itself. While originally the corkscrew layout was considered for the Efteling, it would be another Arrow layout that would make its way to the park. The very same layout of the Carolina Cyclone, which opened in 1980 at Carowinds. This larger version featured not just 2 corkscrews, but also 2 loops, and was the first coaster in the world to have 4 inversions. While the plans for the new coaster were in motion, and the station and landscaping were being designed, not everyone at Efteling was behind the idea of the large, mostly sparse roller coaster being added to the park. Internally, many considered it too large of a departure from the themed fairy tale aspect of the Efteling. Ultimately, it was decided to be given the go-ahead, and with the drop in attendance for the Efteling to continue to survive, some change was needed. Efteling's new roller coaster will be built as far away from the fairy tale forest as possible, to not disrupt that experience. It was built on a former parking lot on the opposite side of the park. While trying not to take away the core experience of the Efteling, they knew they had to do something different to survive. And this, hopefully, would be it. 350 tons of steel were provided by the Dutch Steel Union, which were then welded together on site to create the ride. After construction began, an environmental group protested that the coaster would violate a noise and zoning plan dating back to 1959. Because of this, the construction of the ride was halted, and with the foundations in place, the whole site came to a standstill. The Park Staff Association, guests, people living close by, and construction workers all began a demonstration to hand over a 1,700 sign petition to continue construction, coming together to march through the streets of the city, not only to save the roller coaster, but the Efteling's future, and hand the petition to the local council. It worked, and after a 2-month construction freeze, it was granted that the Efteling could continue building their newest attraction in January 1981. Vekoma worked around the clock to try and catch up for missed time, and despite the delay, the new coaster was completed on time and ready to go for its first public rides. The grand opening of Europe's largest roller coaster was set for April 18, 1981. Called the Python, a large celebration marked the ride's opening. Spread throughout the park, sports displays and celebrities appeared, including local favourites the Dolly Dots, Ron Brandsteder, and Anita Meyer. They finished the celebration, each placing a handprint in cement on the path leading to the ride's entrance. The festivities were not kept at the Efteling, and the park would adopt a real python at the Amsterdam Royal Zoo, where a sign was put up at the exhibit saying this was the Python. After boarding one of the trains and heading up the 95-foot tall lift hill, giving beautiful views of the park as you went, riders went into the first drop and flew through the 2 loops and the double corkscrew along the 2,460 feet of track. The Efteling's roller coaster would be nearly identical to the Carolina Cyclone, though slightly modified to fit the landscape, making it a little bit longer. In an instant, Efteling had not only taken a new step into transforming into a must-visit place, but the small fairy tale park had built the largest, fastest, and longest roller coaster in Europe. Python appeared in many TV shows over the years. Porsche even strapped a real car to the ride in 1989 for a commercial. In 1985, Joe Alcatraz would strap himself to the Python and escape before the train would hit him for a TV show. This was over a decade before Lance Burton would do the same thing with Desperado. Sorry Lance, you're not that original. Efteling has better tricks.
I was stupid. I was really stupid.
The ride would first feature 3 Arrow trains. Later, this was reduced to just 2 running on the track. In the early 90s, it was found that the ride needed major maintenance, and a plan was formed to expand the ride into the Python Plus, adding new track before the corkscrews that went over the nearby canoe pond. This new plan was deemed feasible by Vekoma, and plans for the expansion were underway to more than double the length of the roller coaster. The plan had been all but approved until it was deemed that the budget was just not there to complete it. Instead, the park decided to go with Villa Volta and later add Vogel Rock. The ride's maintenance was still required, and the Arrow trains were replaced with new Vekoma trains, actually making the ride a little bit faster. Small refreshments were made around the ride area, and the needed maintenance was completed. After another decade, the Python would receive new trains again, this time made by Kumbak. With a lower and more open design, the 2 trains were named from a competition as Loopy and Kirky. Instantly, the ride began receiving complaints about how it was now uncomfortable. And not only this, there were many troubled maintenance issues, and multiple rollbacks occurred. These malfunctions continued to happen with the new train on a ride that was once trouble-free. It even once rolled forwards as guests were being evacuated from a stop at the top of the lift hill, with guests still in the trains having to quickly pull down their restraints as it hit the first drop. Luckily, nobody was injured. After multiple problems, the comeback trains became the shortest to travel the Python, when they would be removed in 2011. The park once again looked to Vekoma to make its 4th iteration of the trains for the ride. These new trains not only look better, but are much more comfortable and continue to be the current trains to this day. A new Not so great rumor began to slither into existence in the following years that soon the Python would be no more, as it was nearing the end of its shelf life and the park was looking for a replacement. The decision had finally been made. The Efteling had decided to tear down the Python. The ride had lost its bite. Well, some of it at least. Rather than replace the ride with something else, the park decided it was iconic enough to be rebuilt. One of just a few roller coasters in existence that have been deemed worthy of being kept. While many of the Vekoma coasters from the time were removed and scrapped, the Python would live on. The idea of Python Plus did come up again, but the budget still wasn't there to make it happen. They would rebuild the ride in its current form. Operation Python would fully renovate the ride, and still company CSM would supply new tracks and supports for the coaster. In January 2018, the original Python closed forever. The trains were taken off the track, and a select few were chosen to climb the lift hill of the ride for its final time. Right after, the only parts that will remain will be the lift hill, drop, station, and break intersection, along with the original foundations. Every other piece of track will be cut into small pieces and removed for scrap. The new track, made in France, will be transported to the Efteling and the rebuilding began, with slight modifications to the original layout to make the ride smoother and give it a more modern feel. The brakes, which were previously manual in the station, would now be automatic, with the control system also updated and modernized, and the remaining old track pieces were connected to the brand new pieces. If you visit the Efteling, take a look and you can see the old and new combined. Costing 4.5 million euros, Operation Python was complete, and just 12 weeks after closing, the Python was ready to ride again. The same year, Efteling would announce that it would develop a seat for babies to ride the Python, even testing the seat on the ride, with many excited that their babies would be the first to ride the iconic rebuilt attraction. Actually, that was just an April Fool's joke from the park. The Efteling had kept the ride's legacy going, and it reopened smoother than ever for many to enjoy for years to come. While today it no longer remains anything near the biggest ride in Europe, its importance and opening cannot be understated. Nothing else existed on the same scale anywhere in Europe when it opened, and the Python had been an instant success in its opening year. The year it opened, Efteling had 400,000 more people visit the park than the year before, proving the investment had been the right one, and the Efteling would become a huge hit with the addition of the ride. The Python had literally not only changed the direction of the park's future, but made sure it had one. A huge turning point for the small park that led to the creation of some of the best rides ever built anywhere in the world. The Efteling had not only made the right decision to build the attraction in the first place, but also when they decided to rebuild it and preserve it for future generations. Efteling is truly one of the best and unique theme parks in the world, and without the Python, who knows if the park would even still exist today. Python transformed and pushed forward roller coasters all around Europe, making it truly an iconic European coaster. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Expedition Efteling. If you enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe to join the expedition, follow us on Twitter and Instagram for updates on upcoming episodes, and a special thank you to our Patreons for supporting the channel. We will see you next time.